but it's sort of like climbing a mountain where you can't see the top. It's really far away, and you put your head down and you hike for a few hours and you look up and it doesn't really look like you're any closer than you were. But if you look back, you can see where you've come from. And as you get closer and closer to the peak, it will come more and more into focus. And that's really what a big, gorgeous goal is like.
Welcome to the Sales Problem Podcast, where we talk everything sales, success, and personal growth. Thanks for joining us. Let's get growing.
Okay, welcome back to the Sales Problem Podcast, and welcome to Season 3, Episode number 3. This episode is all about big, gorgeous goals and inspiring the future generation of leaders. We have had a fantastic group of women on the show in our first 2 seasons, very lucky with that. And the common theme has been making the impossible possible. And today's show puts an exclamation point on that theme. I'm your host, Steve Comerford, and joining me is my co-host, the man who is, I guess, has got a huge amount of big, gorgeous goals all on his own, Dan Burns. Dan, how are you doing?
Steve, I'm fantastic. I do have big, gorgeous goals that I'm excited about. And I'm excited because I'm drinking Crank. I'm drinking a little bit of Fifth Gear today. So as always, the caffeine is hitting my system. So today, Steve, I thought with Season 3 happening, I would just do a very positive rant to kick off the show. I don't want to hold anything back in Season 3. So what's been sitting inside my head, Steve, is this little point that Martin made on episode number 1 about us having a choice. And I got thinking about, as I was pouring my coffee, is my Sales Problem Podcast mug half empty, Steve, or is it half full?
Interesting.
And we've got a choice of different coffees that I could put in it, but the choice is, how do I see it? And somebody asked me what I was doing this weekend, and I excitedly said, I'm filming a podcast. And they said, why would you spend your weekend working, doing a podcast? And I thought, that sounds like a half-empty type of question to me. And the way I look at it, Steve, is I get to go on for the next hour with you, who's a great friend, right? We get to talk about a topic, sales and personal growth, that we both love. I always learn something every episode. So we get to take something away with us. And we've got this fantastic guest on today. And I know that our listeners are going to learn something from her. So I'm super excited today. And I'm wondering what we're going to learn from Julie today. That's my positive rant. My cup is half full, Steve. It's half full of Crank. I might have a little too much caffeine, but that's what's on my mind. Back to you.
You totally came from left field on that one, Dan, but I love your rant. And hopefully the podcast fills up the other half of your coffee mug. That would be good. Was that a good connection? I don't know if that worked. But I do appreciate that point. I think the two of us are very lucky, right? First 2 seasons, we've met a ton of people I had never met before. They're interesting. They're, taking on life, taking on challenges, lots of ups and downs, but a lot of positivity and a lot of good things that have come from those conversations. So I'm with you. I feel I'm a pretty lucky guy. So it's pretty good. Anyway,
let's go. Let's go, Steve. Let's get to our guest.
And just because Crank Coffee has been nice enough to give us a discount, just go online. I ordered the other day. You get a nice little discount. Comes right to your door. So take advantage of it if you can. Let's start this little podcast, Dan. Where am I? Okay, so let's go. All right, we have Julie Ellis on the show today. Speaker, author, leadership coach, and award-winning entrepreneur. She co-founded a crazy successful business in a basement and later sold it at an 8-figure price. Not bad. Julie's big goal now is to inspire high-achieving women leaders and entrepreneurs to set big, gorgeous goals These aren't the safe, achievable goals. They're the ones that, block out the sun, the ones that scare you and keep you up at night. And get this, Dan, she has just started her own podcast, fellow podcaster, called Figure Eight. She delves into the world of eight-figure entrepreneurship, blending insightful business strategies with inspirational stories from women who dance their way to remarkable achievements. Julie, so happy to have you on the show. How are you doing today? How are you feeling?
Thank you. I'm feeling good today. I'm so glad to be here.
After this rant, how could you not feel, pretty good about stuff?
Yeah, I might need more coffee, but I feel good.
We can hook you up.
Yeah, that's just the way it goes. So Julie, let's get kicking and screaming onto some questions here, and a little more about you. So we started this season 3 with a bit of a different angle to the start. Little elevator pitches as we go up the floors 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you're ready,
Yes.
your little 1-minute pitch on these topics. Hopefully they're interesting to you and the listeners. So let's get going. On floor number 1, the topic is the fear of the unknown.
I think we all are afraid of the unknown, and we have a choice in front of us of whether we decide to leap into it or sit and watch and wait for it to happen. But until we decide to take the leap, we are never going to know what can happen and what's possible when we take that big step forward. And so I think that's where the big, gorgeous goals come in, is that they are really a piece of that leap into the unknown and the thing that you really want and the thing that you're going to decide to say no to other things in your life for, so that you have the space, the time to make that leap, even though you feel afraid.
Very nice. Love it. Limits on floor number 2.
I think most of our limits are in our own mind. So we, limit ourselves. I mean, there are some things in your life, like I was never going to go to the Olympics. I wasn't a sporty kid. But a lot of the things that we really want to do in life, we limit ourselves by our own small thinking and our own, I couldn't possibly kind of voices that come into play. And until we decide to push on the limits and see how far we can move them, I don't think we know what our limits really are. So I think it's important to push and test limits on an ongoing basis by chasing the things that we really want that make us feel a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit nervous and a little bit uncertain.
Okay. So on floor number 3, we have the topic of community.
Well, you can't do anything alone. I think it's a lot harder if you try. And building community around you, whether it's through, mentors, advisors, mastermind groups. I have a group of women that I call my privy council, and they see things in me that sometimes I doubt in myself. And so they're willing to push me really hard when I need that push. They're willing to pick me up off the floor when I try something and it doesn't work out and I fall down. And they're willing to always lend an ear. And so I think that piece of community is a real key to being able to put your stakes in the ground and say things out loud to people, being able to think about how you want to move forward, getting some advice in safe places with sounding boards that you trust.
Well, I'm glad I asked those 3 because that's the one thing that I saw in a lot of your posts and your book and how you've kind of succeeded at things are those 3 pieces, which gets to the last floor, which is big, gorgeous goals. Tell us about that.
You have to start somewhere. And I think when we make goals that are contained, or we really want to measure and have them really like SMART goals, if we start there, we play it way too safe. And so, we get stuck in our to-do lists and our fears about going for something that's really outside of the box. And I think that setting a big, gorgeous goal is about a goal that maybe you can't identify all the pieces to it. Maybe you don't have the right connections, or you don't have the money, or you don't have the knowledge that you're going to need in order to accomplish it. Maybe you're not even exactly sure and clear on what the goal is, but it's kind of up there in the clouds. And until you start stepping towards it and making some progress, you don't know how far you're going to be able to get. And so you need to set that big goal. And sometimes a to-do list will come out of it to get you moving in the first few steps, or a SMART goal will come out of it because you need to have something to measure as you start progressing. But it's sort of like climbing a mountain where you can't see the top. It's really far away, and you put your head down and you hike for a few hours and you look up and it doesn't really look like you're any closer than you were. But if you look back, you can see where you've come from. And as you get closer and closer to the peak, it will come more and more into focus. And that's really what a big, gorgeous goal is like. It's long term, it's big, it might not be super clear to you, but you need to get on the path towards it and start making progress in order to get closer and closer to what you want.
Thank you for that. I wanted to, if people haven't seen the book or the cover of the book, right? I like the visual with the box. Can you explain, just go one step further on that one, and why the visual of that? I think you've explained it as a small, small box thinking. Am I right on that one, or how
Yeah. And when we contain ourselves in boxes, right? And so when we don't think big enough, we put ourselves into small places, and it can get smaller and smaller and smaller as we start to sort of lose confidence, or we're unsure about where to go next. And so the book cover became kind of a metaphor for what I'm talking about in the book, where you're sitting in the box and the flaps up top are open and you're basically looking at a starry sky. And that is really, we are talking about reach for the stars kind of goals. You try to reach for the stars, maybe you land on the moon. But if you never try to reach for the stars, you're not getting to the moon. So it's about really pushing yourself for the big things and breaking out of the small places, the fears that keep us from really going for what we want.
Steve, get off the elevator because I want on the elevator. Julie, I loved what you said on every single floor. And I knew I would learn something from you today, and I think I've already got it. I love what you said about deciding to take the leap. And I think that's where sometimes I see people waiting to make a decision, and they're waiting for the perfect time, and they just don't make any decision because of the uncertainty. So I love that you said you just have to decide to go after that big, gorgeous goal.
Yeah, I think you can find parallels, I think, with leadership in decision making and goals in decision making. And it's sort of that, like, not making a decision is also making a decision. It's a decision to do nothing. And that's not going to move you forward. And so finding ways to make even small decisions to get some forward movement that can maybe get you some momentum to making bigger decisions. I think big, gorgeous goals are also a little bit like a reverse sales funnel, where you start at the small end of the funnel, and when, with something that feels really big, but once you do that, you can set bigger and bigger and bigger goals as you go sort of up and out from there.
Amazing. So, Julie, our listeners are salespeople, they're leaders, they're entrepreneurs. Some of them are in their car right now. They're driving, listening, and they want that nugget of info from you that they can only get from somebody with your experience, especially experience going from 7 figures to 8 figures. So what's your favorite nugget of information? If you could just choose one thing to pass on to our audience today, what would it be?
I think you've always got to work on yourself as a leader, as you're trying to make progress in your goals, in your life, in your leadership, within your career. That was big learning, going from 7 to 8 figures. You go from this place as a 7-figure business where you have a founding team. It's pretty small, probably sit at the table and make a lot of decisions together. You're pulling for the same thing. And somewhere you cross a bridge between 7 and 8 figures of revenue where you need to show up as the leader. It's not like the same small team that's all pulling for the same thing. People have jobs, and that's okay, that come to your place of work and contribute. And you feel more pressure because you've got a lot more people that are relying on you for their livelihoods and for their families' livelihoods. And you need to really up your leadership as you progress down through your career and grow into bigger things. And never forgetting to work on that. It is a practice. It's not a destination. It's not a checkbox. It's not a to-do list. It really is a practice of things that are sort of ongoing. And, I think if you look at leadership 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, like, things change. And so you need to be able to adapt and to keep moving forward and to continue to work on yourself.
I love that. I wrote down leadership is a practice, something you're constantly and never-endingly working on. If we look at big, gorgeous goals, that they're big, they're huge goals, and that can be intimidating to some people. So talk to us a little bit about going from the big goal to breaking things down. Some of our listeners have probably heard of micro goals, or we've heard the phrase, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's all well and good, but how do you go from having that big goal to something that is tangible, is that first step?
I think you have to break down into those small steps. Otherwise, it just feels so enormous that you don't know where to start. And so I always recommend that people break it down. What I do myself is sit down and think of, okay, what are the first 3 or 5 steps that I want to accomplish here? Do I need to do some research? Can I actually go and start, I kind of know what the steps are. Am I sure that I don't need to find the right lane to be in here? But pick those first 3 or 5 things and get going. And then set up a system around that where in 3 months, you're going to sit down with your goal and a pen and paper and figure out how you're doing. Did I do the 3 or 5 things I said I was going to do? How did they go? Do I feel like I'm making progress and I'm closer to knowing, maybe clearing up some of those things that are in the clouds or that I don't know about? Am I on the right path? So if I've cleared up some of the things in the clouds and I'm not quite calibrated correctly, how am I going to calibrate back to what the next steps are to make myself move forward again? And, if you sit down in 3 months and say, I set out 3 to 5 steps and I didn't do them, then that's part of the recalibration as well, in terms of, what do I need to do? What's keeping me from getting started? Do I need accountability? Do I need someone to give me the pump up that I need to get going? Do I need to just speak out to the world that this is what I'm going to work on, so that somebody's going to, email me in another month and be like, hey, you said you were doing this. How's it going? And, figuring out what you need in order to get started and what's keeping you from getting started, because it's often just our own fear or the little voice inside our own head that says we can't or we shouldn't or we're not worthy.
Well, I was going to go that route, Julie. But a lot of women listeners that we have great ideas, but just never know how to get started. You touch on a few things there, but is it that fear of unknown, or you mentioned, or Dan mentioned about, having to know 100% of the next thing that you have to do. I listened to you, and there are a number of things that you did that you risked a bunch of things. You turned out right. I think you hit a couple of influencers. They turned back. They all of a sudden needed product from you, and you had to flip things upside down just to get it done. Right? You didn't have it, but then you created it, and then you fulfilled the promise. Right? But anyway, I'm all over the place. The question is around, again, how do you get started? Like, what would be your best advice there?
I think you need to figure out what those first couple of steps are. I really think that getting started is, so often you're like, oh, I don't know where to start. Okay, well, is it that I need to sit with a whiteboard or a blank piece of paper? Do I need to get out and you need to clear your schedule and get out into nature. Or like one of the things I always say is if I fly on an airplane, I should always sit by a window and have a blank notebook with me, because that is like a place where I can look out that window and be like, and ideas will come for me. So how do you, and I mean, I can't always go and get on an airplane when I need to have ideas. So then you got to figure out what are the other things, right? I live near a Great Lake. I can go down to the water and watch the waves and sit with a notebook on a bench. I can walk in a forest. I can, even sometimes I can just lay on the couch in my office, but I have to get away from the screen. I have to get away from, sitting at my desk in a chair and unlock some of that creativity. And if I still feel stuck, then often I bring a person into the game. So, I have a mastermind group. So I'll go and sit with the people in my mastermind group and say, okay, here's where I want to go. I'm a little stuck on where to get started. Can we brainstorm ideas of how I could start? And go away with a great big list of ideas and then figure out, I'm going to try this one and this one. But I think you do have to get creative and you have to be a bit tenacious if you feel stuck about getting started.
Do you find that it's once you ask that question, it's like, oh, that was easy. Do you get
Sometimes,
that sense? Yeah.
Yep.
Because
sometimes, yes. And you're like, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
Sometimes it sends you back into another place where you need to contemplate a little bit, because maybe the answers you get from other people about how to start are completely unexpected to you, or things that you would have don't feel like they align. Sometimes you've got to say, well, they might not feel like it, but I'm going to try it anyway. Sometimes you've got to go back and say, am I not able to sort of outline what I really think this goal is? And do I need to do a little bit more work on figuring it out? Like, where's the misalignment? Is it just in my own creative mind that I need to try some things that feel a little outside of the box to me? Or is it that maybe there's something here where this needs a little bit more defining, and how am I going to do that?
Okay. Well, then the question follows up on this one. You mentioned leadership and going from 7 to 8 figures and just how you show up differently. But where in the storyline did you have that, hit the plateau moment? You either got stuck or you just kind of hit a cruise zone, something in there that just you needed to kind of hit another gear or shake it up a little bit. Can you give some story or advice on that one?
Well, there's always those places where you're sort of like trying something and it doesn't work. So you try something else. And everybody talks about resistance points when you get to, certain revenue thresholds in your business. And you create systems and then they take you a ways, and then suddenly you're like, why is everything broken again? And, it is those things of like, we went through a phase where we would be launching a product at Mabel's Labels, or, starting up like a back to school season where we had special products coming in, we had special deals going on, and there were a lot of moving parts. And suddenly the things we were doing, like, we just could not do anything right. And so we had to really sit down and look at, did we have the right process to do it? And what we learned there was our project planning was no longer sufficient for the size the business came. We had to look at who were the people at the table that we were passing the information to. And we realized that we didn't have all the right people at the table that we needed. And we were kind of reluctant to add people because it felt like this meeting's getting really expensive. We are bringing a lot of people and we're all sitting around talking instead of actually doing things. But we learned that the talking was important, and it saved us hours and hours of time later to bring people to the table so that they could hear all the communication and solve the problems and all go off and pull in the same direction. And so it's those kinds of things where you learn, you make adjustments, and then you're able to move forward again for a period of time before you hit the next threshold where something's breaking and you need to reinvent it again.
So, Julie, I want to flip it a little bit, because in sales, there's always the objections. Whenever we try to sell, there's always somebody we run across that thinks a little differently. I'm loving everything that you're saying, but I'm thinking about the person that's a bit of a doubter, and they're thinking about, the flip side of everything. tell our listeners about a time where you just wanted to stay in your comfort zone. You wanted to throw in the towel, maybe go back to what is safe, what is easy, because I think as you push towards big, gorgeous goals, some of those feelings might come up for our listeners. And how did you tackle them? And were there times where you wrestled with that?
Definitely, I have had times where I wrestled with that. And especially, I mean, I had co-founders within the business, and that gave an automatic push, a group of people who pushed each other. But after we sold the business, when I left, which I didn't really think I would ever leave Mabel's Labels. So I was sort of that person, you know, the founder who'd go in and take up the boardroom and drink coffee and chit chat with people all day. And instead, I ended up leaving. And after I left, I really struggled to figure out what I would do next. And after being somebody who set big goals and climbed for big things, that sort of like untethering of me to something that was a big part of my identity made it really hard for me. And I got really stuck. And as I got stuck, I became guilty of thinking smaller and smaller. And it is one of the things that actually led me to writing the book is that experience, because I needed to figure out what my next act would look like. I needed to stop being afraid that I would fail. And people would say, oh, look what happened. She couldn't do anything after she did the one big thing. And like that was the voice that was in my head. And so I really had to figure out how to reconnect to the big thinking that had served me so well. And I had to get back on a path to figuring out what the big, gorgeous goals were that I had for myself in how I wanted to come to the world and what I wanted to do.
I love it. What I heard the most there was that piece on identity. And I think that really is the way we see ourselves is so important. And then you transitioned into that voice in our head. And I think so many people can relate to that, Julie. I think we all have that talk going on in our head, and getting back to the positive rant at the beginning. Is it positive or is it negative? And I imagine our listeners have days where it's positive and it's negative, depending on, the situation that they're in. I want to stay on the flip side here and just talk a little bit about people's thought process when they're going to tackle a big, gorgeous goal. And they're thinking there's got to be a quick fix. Like there's got to be a fast, easy way to get to that. And I think that there's a lot out there on social media about here's the hack. Here's the 6-minute solution to it. And in sales, there's a lot of people making those promises about how they can get people to that big, gorgeous goal, but do it shortcutting all the steps. So maybe give us your thoughts on that. And is it possible, or is it better to go the long road and just really commit to that?
I think that it is always the longer road. That sort of, if it sounds easy, probably not. It's easy today to look at social media and places where you see things and be like, well, overnight success right there. Like, what am I doing wrong? But the truth is all of those overnight successes were, 5-10 years in the making, and we don't see often. We don't want to see maybe sometimes, but or we don't want to show ourselves the hard work it took to actually get to the success point. And so I think that everything takes work. And so it's going to be the longer and harder path. It doesn't mean you shouldn't look for shortcuts, and, we shouldn't lay ourselves down as martyrs and say, well, I did it the hardest way possible. We should look for ways to make it easier and efficiencies and all of those good things. But I don't think it's the short, easy path that's probably getting us to the things that we really want.
I tend to agree with you on that, Julia. I think that harder path shapes us into who we eventually become. And we may get the big, gorgeous goal because we became that person along the path that was a little bit harder. So I love that.
Totally agree. It's that thing about lucky people. Like they're lucky because they worked hard and they created some conditions that brought the luck. That's what I believe. It's not, luck isn't more like a lightning strike. It's more like I'm making the conditions to bring luck to myself. And so how am I going to use that when it comes?
Yeah, it's funny how our brain wants it to be easy. So I think we seek out that, like, there's got to be a way because that would be so much better for me.
Yeah. And we see what we think is easy for other people. And I think that is a big misnomer in what actually is happening.
I want to go back to a point in the questions, Julie. I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about the team that you put around you, and go a little bit deeper. That you have that solo entrepreneur. They have that idea in their head. They are channeled to bring on other people. Have you found it challenging for that, because you coach these people to go from 7 to 8 figures and bring on these teams and hire the right people? But that is a total change of that solo entrepreneur and that solo focus. How do you break that or get that person to open up a little bit more broader to take on the ideas from the team?
It's hard. I mean, we start businesses because people see a need in the world or an opportunity for something that doesn't exist. I don't think anybody starts a business saying, and I'm going to manage 100 people one day. And so it's a big change and a big challenge. It's also a big challenge because you go from needing very generalist people who can do many, many jobs for you and who see what's needed in a very small business and can do that, to needing specialists in their areas of, in their domain of expertise. And suddenly you're not necessarily expert at the table. You need to learn how to take advice from people who work for you, but also put the right checkpoints in place to make sure that you can trust what the information is when you maybe don't know anything about it yourself. And finance is like a common one and an easy example in that, you're probably going to hire somebody who's going to a controller or a director of finance or a CFO, and they're going to take over the accounting function for you. But you as the founder need to have a strong month-end process to look at the integrity of the bookkeeping and understand that everything's working the way it should. And so learning that, even though you might not have a finance background, and understanding how your business works is still a really important piece for you in the puzzle. And that's just one example, right? You could go, role after role and department after department. I think another piece of it is like the learning how to delegate. Nobody comes and says, here's how to delegate well. So you have to figure out, how to ensure and how not to micromanage people, and, how to trust that when you delegate the work, you're going to get back the product that you need.
I like that piece. And I think you wrote a little piece online around delegation just recently too. So if anybody has not checked out Julie's post on LinkedIn, take a look. Which then gets me to my next piece, right? So you've had the book, fantastic. You've started the podcast. How is that going? Because you probably are touching on a number of topics here or in this conversation that you're interviewing a number of women on your podcast. So share a little bit about how that's going and maybe what gems you've picked up so far.
Starting a podcast was one of those sort of big goals for me because I, didn't really understand the technology part of it. And I got a little bit overwhelmed at one point in the path of getting to launch of what all the options are out there and all the different price points that you can pay to, have people help you. But I made it, and I'm finding some really interesting conversations. I've got an upcoming episode where, well into the 8 figures entrepreneur who is working with a staff of mostly contractors fractional people, which is a
Okay.
super interesting way to build a business. My last interview, also 8-figure, 13 hardware stores, and has hired a lot of people coming out of prison, coming out of recovery programs, and, got a lot of pushback from people about that in terms of risk and all of the things, but has been very successful. And now she's exiting by selling her business to her employees. So I'm looking for those kind of, what are the things that people are doing that they're done for sure. People sell their businesses to their employees, but not that many of them. And lots of people don't think about that as an exit strategy. And it's a really good one if you get your business to a level where, it's time for you to retire and you've got a strong employee base. It's a good idea. And so trying to just shed light. I also think that people understand they can do things when they see people and hear stories about people who have done it already. And so looking for that sort of spark of inspiration or spark of like an idea of, I never thought of selling my business to my employees, or I never thought of using fractional people to get my business to where it needed to go because I can hire better experts than, on a fractional basis than hiring a generalist on a full-time basis. So what are the different things people are doing to help them advance their businesses that can give people ideas and confidence to go out and make some decisions for themselves?
Very good. Are you enjoying being a podcaster?
Yes, more than I would have imagined. Yeah. Yeah.
It is neat. Like Dan and I started this, right? We're on the season 3. It was like, what are we getting ourselves involved with? How do we not talk over each other? How do we, make it interesting? But hey, you just have to put one foot in front of the other, give it a try, and, make little tweaks along the way. So glad to hear that it's working really, really well for me. I listened to a couple of episodes already, some great interviews and some great insights from the people that you have on the show. So continued success. And I'll just ask one other question is that, is there anything else that we haven't asked you that either you talk about in your book or you think would be important for our listeners?
I think that, finding space, being willing to say no to some things to create the space, to think about going and doing something that maybe you've always wanted in your heart of hearts, or a goal that you at some point in your past left by the side of the road that, you still long for, or the next big thing that you want to go after. You need to make time for it. So you need to say no, and you need to stop busying yourself, stop binging that series you're watching on TV or whatever the case may be. It's a choice. And so you need to lean into the yes of going after your big, gorgeous goals and setting yourself up for having the time to chase them.
I love that. No is a choice. And sometimes you do have to say no. Julie, you've shared so many great things, and I just want to come back to your podcast and encourage everybody to go and subscribe to Julie's podcast. I'm going to link it in our show notes so it's easy to get to her because she has shared so many amazing things on the podcast so far today. One of the things, Julie, I saw online that I really loved is you said, dance your way from 7 figures to 8 figures. And you wouldn't know this, Julie, but I love to dance. I'm a guy that when a song comes on, I cannot stay in my seat. I just have to get up and dance. So why did you choose that language? And tell us a little bit about your connection to dance and how you dance your way between figures.
Well, we took that because dance is a big part of my history and my life. I grew up in a dance studio and went to university and obtained a degree in dance. So I have a Bachelor of Arts in Dance. And so it's one of those things where it applies as a metaphor in so many ways, because you can like grind your way, you can scratch your way, you can claw your way to eight figures. But what if you could dance your way to 8 figures? It sounds so much more fun and so much lighter and easier. And I'm not saying it doesn't mean there won't be hard moments or you don't have to have dedication, discipline, and train for it, because those things all go with dance. But it doesn't have to be lonely, and it doesn't have to be as hard. If you can put the right people around you, in order to lighten the load.
That is amazing. It makes me think of, I wasn't a runner in university, but I had friends who ran, and their coach at one time said, dance up the hills. Because the mentality was you put your head down and you grind your way up the hill, and it is tiring, and it's, not something anybody wants to do. But just that phrase has always stuck with me. What if you just danced your way up the hill? What if you were light on your feet? What if it was easy and your steps weren't so labored and your head wasn't down all the time? So I love that perspective.
100% that I believe that we don't have to make it as hard as it seems in our own minds. And so we've got to find those ways of thinking about how it's playful or fun or easier.
Julie, where can our listeners find more about you?
You can find me on my website at www.julieellis.ca.
Wonderful. Thank you for everything you've brought to the podcast today. And I want to toss it over to you, Steve. Final thoughts.
Dan, I got to go back to your rant at the beginning, right? Your mug was half full. Did the rest of it get filled up with Julie's commentary and advice and insights?
It is overflowing, Steve.
I
it's
think
all
so.
over the desk in front of me. I've written so many notes. I was like, I'll at least get one thing today, but I got a dozen things, and so did our listeners.
I like the right off the get-go, right, in terms of your leadership and how you have to change and step up, or in terms of practicing leadership on a continual basis. I love that piece. I love the piece about team and having the right people around you to move the business forward. And I like the piece around no. It's so often you say yes to everything, and then you're overwhelmed, and then you never get anywhere, and you have to kind of narrow your focus. So, hey, Julie, thank you. We really appreciate you being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.
Awesome. Well, listeners, I feel pumped, focused on big, gorgeous goals. I hope you are too. Definitely a lot more confident listening to Julie. So, Julie, you helped us solve the sales problem today, gave our listeners some new knowledge that they need to thrive and succeed, and you've helped them grow by enhancing what they know. Listeners, we love you. We really appreciate you. We thank you for tuning in to Season 3, and go back to Season 1 and 2. There's a lot of good content there. If you've learned something from the podcast today, share it with a friend, tap them on the shoulder, tell them that you need to listen to this because, again, it's good stuff, and I think it will help you today, tomorrow, and the next day. So we'll see you on the next episode. Until then, keep building the best version of you.
Thank you.